meaning do the physical motions of the prayer have for you? And why not just perform ment prayer?
Well, there are books I have seen and essays I have read about the meaning and the symbolism of the movements in the prayers. And that's well and good. I don't happen to remember much about that. But the value of some physical movements is that it brings more of us into the spiritual life. And that rather than keeping things simply conceptual, religion at its best, and certainly the path, is addressed to the whole person. Part of that whole person is the physical body. So the use of the physical body in sacred rituals is an expedient means.
It's also the body praying. It's a physical prayer.
Yes.
And requires a lot more involvement and allows less distraction.
Yes.
But, I don't think of it symbolically.
No.
I mean, I have tried to, pana and pana al pana, whatever.
Yes, right.
And those are nice, but finally, it's just doing something that makes you aware you're in God's presence. And
yes, and it's a way of expressing devotion.
Yeah, it says something. The movements of the body say something.
Right.
And you don't bow to something that you don't have some kind of good attitude toward.
Yes, and the point others keep making to me is that physical movements and the use of the body is really very important in the direct path.
Well, at least awareness.
Yes, that's the whole point in the direct path.
Yeah, be there when you move as well.
Yeah, precisely. And as tightly bonded as you are with this thing that moves, in the process, learn that that's not you.
Right. You could almost see individual self with its individual body as an impersonal prayer, and then you can just live it or not.
And Seda Badria?
I think you did a good job of explaining things. I think if someone wants to get into the Islamic prayer, there's been plenty of books on that. But I'll just say, I tend to take a creative approach to the prayer. I'm not orthodox in the way that I pray. And for me personally, I don't feel like I need to be. But the important thing for me is the principle. And part of that is making sure that I engage with the fountain of being, the divine essence, and its various manifestations multiple times a day, to feel like I'm engaging with the cyclical nature of being in the cosmos. And also to engage various parts of myself, the emotional self, the physical self, the mental self. And mental prayer is important. There are certain aspects of a mental prayer that I like. There's one of them that Simone Weil used to great effect, which was the repetition of the Paternoster over and over again until she felt she recited it perfectly. And if she made some mistake, even mentally, she'd start from the beginning. But there's also something to be said for engaging the body. So I have been to the tombs of various saints, and if you sit there on a bench and you mentally engage with the saint, that's one thing. But to get down at the base of the saint's grave and to touch one's forehead to the ground, there's a certain next level meaning that's attended with that, and it brings one closer, in essence, spiritually to the saint, not in terms of some sort of theory or idea, but in terms of the depth of feeling that one should ideally experience.
Although that could be dangerous in some fundamentalist settings.
Oh, everything I just said is dangerous in a fundamentalist setting. I mean, any number of things I just said would get me beheaded if I was in Saudi Arabia. I mean, the fact of the matter is, when I said I'm creative with the prayer, I mean, I am creative with the prayer. I'm like going up on a mountain at 3 a.m. and then doing naked sun salutations, kind of creative with the prayer. I don't feel a need to be orthodox and follow the prayer as outlined in the Hadith, as long as I'm following certain principles.
Yeah, ultimately, it's between you and God.
Between you and God, unless you're partaking in a communal event like a mob.
Yes, then it matters. I'm not saying it doesn't matter other times, but who am I to say?
Well, Seda Zainab has joined us.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. She has a body and it prays.
To fill you inside, Zainab, I asked the first question, which is, what meaning do the physical motions of the prayer have for you, and why not just perform mental prayer?
That's a very good question.
Well, we've already answered it exhaustively, but we thought we'd let
I'm sure we've left some things out.
Well, I think whatever I have to say will be repetitive, but a prayer is not just the body on its own or the mind on its own. A prayer is the whole being is involved in prayer. And so what I think prayer is, not in terms of bodily movements or inward mind peace, I think prayer as the being wanting to be.
I like that.
Well, and also, mental prayers can be pretty abstract.
Right.
And if the body is involved, it's a little easier to be present and to, have more of an experience in it.
Yeah, and I think also, like, if you look at how meditations are done, usually it's coming from the outward to inward. And the first thing we often hear in meditations, to relax your body, relax those tight jaws and relax your shoulders, because they are all aids to become centered and to then be present with whatever you want to be present with.
Right. I mean, you can have that move inward, but there's a place for responding to that and acting in some way, if for nobody else but yourself. I suppose ideally you would feel like the prayer was moving the body and not the body following the prayer. But it's nice. It's really nice. When I was thinking about becoming a Muslim and entering the tariqah, I remember thinking or saying to myself, how nice it would be to bow down to God. And I said that to somebody in our metaphysical group, and he said, nah, I can't see that. I couldn't do that. And he didn't follow us into the tariqah.
No, and those who did tended to have the attitude, this is a way I can express this.
Right.
This is something I can do.
Yeah, this is where I can make the connection I've been looking for.
Yeah, I can make a connection. This is the package I can get into with it.
Yeah.
The British author John Cowper Powys, in a couple of his philosophical works, makes the point that, if you turn God into an abstraction and start talking about the first cause or first principle, it's sort of hard to pray to that. And it's the same kind of point that Iamblichus makes against Plotinus. If you just simply talk about the one, you can't have much of a personal relationship with the one. And so long as we're here in this realm of transience, and so long as we're embodied, it's actually very helpful emotionally, psychologically, and so on to have a personal relationship with the divine. And whether one calls that Jesus or Hermes or Allah, it's a personal relationship and it's important.
Yes, of course.
There's a sense in which performing the movement can make you more aware that you're in the presence of God, because you have the sense that somebody else is there that you're praying to.
I'm also reminded of Greg telling me when he started to study Advaita Vedanta that as much as it was really Jnanic path, essentially, he was told, pick one of the deities to worship, because the sentiments are part of one's being and one has to employ those too.
Exactly. And that's the difference between Western Buddhism and Western Vedanta versus traditional Buddhism and traditional Vedanta. Traditional Buddhism, whether it's Zen or it's Tibetan Buddhism of various strains, or Advaita Vedanta or Kashmir Shaivism, all of them are non-dualist, but all of them traditionally have one worshiping some form of deity in some form or another, because that's important. It's the Western forms that get rid of that, and I think at their own peril.
Yes, I agree. And I discussed that a lot with Greg. And yes, this is an important element of our Constitution that needs to be employed. And you can't practice one of the yogas. You have to practice all of the yogas. Even if you're really concentrating on one, you can't leave the others out.
Yes, because it's part of what we are.
That's right. And the revelation is addressed to the entire person.
Right. And there's a reason. I assume there's a reason. I think it's interesting that we use the same verb, to feel, to apply to sensation and emotion.
Yes, is true.
So, it helps one to be emotionally connected to include the body. because there is a, what's the word I'm looking for? But, there's a physical feeling that goes with emotion. And so it makes sense to me that if you're going to include all parts of yourself, that moving and feeling is part of it. And sometimes you don't know how you feel till you move.
Feel, yes. Well, some of this discussion reminds me, if I could go off on a tangent for a moment, back principally to Santa Badria's sun salute in the middle of the night, and how that would not be acceptable in more fundamental places. And I just want to say what a great bane fundamentalism is of any nature. And I'm not thinking so much about religious fundamentalists. I don't deal much with them because I stay away from them and I'm not interested in engaging them. But I run into a lot of scientific fundamentalists.
Yeah.
Whose argument is, well, if it hasn't been demonstrated in the laboratory, if it hasn't been done in a controlled double-blind study, it's not valid. And the argument that I ran into this week, refuting that, was an argument about parachutes. Because most of us feel that if we're going to jump out of an airplane, we should have a parachute. But there has never been a controlled double-blind study of a group that jumps out of an airplane and a controlled group that jumps with a parachute. That's never been done. So we all believe this, but there's no controlled double-blind evidence to suggest that's true. It's all anecdotal.
Yeah. Well, for those that can tell an anecdote.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
And how do we know if we jump out of the plane at 40,000 feet without the parachute that one of the bionic interactive reconnaissance drones won't swoop in and safely land us?
You mean the so-called birds?
Yes.
Bionic reconnaissance drones? Yes. Birds.
Partly
Maybe they will.
Birds.
Still with us, Sayyidah Zainab?
Yes,
We seem to be wandering around a lot. Will you wander with us?
I'm being entertained.
Well, and one thing that I didn't mention is that just because there is a prescribed form for the prayer doesn't mean it's the only way you can pray. It's one that you know is right.
Well, yeah, and there's many that one knows that are right because many people have used them efficaciously in other traditions. One thinks of Orthodox Jesus prayer, for instance, or many other forms of prayer. I think a lot of it comes down to taste. Some of us have different taste in food. Some like spicy food, some don't. I think a lot of it does come down to that, but not so much a matter of I'm going to pick the easiest prayer, but I'm going to pick the one that's most efficacious. And so one has to practice self-awareness to know what really does work for them. And ultimately, like I said before, there's individual prayer and there's communal prayer. You can't really have anarchy in a church or a mosque with everybody praying in their different way. It wouldn't work. It would be chaos. It would be fun, and maybe you could have
for a while
while that's happening, but it wouldn't function well. On the other hand, for individual prayer, I think, it actually might behoove one to experiment a little, because just simply saying, oh, this is what the tradition has passed down, let me follow this, might not get the person where they need to go at the rate that is most efficacious for them.
Sure. We can learn physical things from other traditions. You can't prescribe something outside of the primary religion, but you don't have to forbid it.
And honestly, I think it's time we stop prescribing things in general. Been there, done that. Let's move on. Sometimes, when you have the only religion that's talked about being fundamentalism, people get the perception that the only thing that religion is a large number of rules and prescriptions. And that's why people leave without ever having tasted what religion really is all about.
Yeah, it's pretty dry if it's just rules. Not only that, the fundamentalists completely dishonor Christianity. They've convinced a lot of the population that Christianity is something for stupid people.
Yes, that was one of our great problems with religion, remember? And part of the Great Search.
Yeah, that, there are places you can look that turn out not to have anything in them.
But I would actually have to say that science is turning into something for stupid people, because you're having far too many scientific fundamentalists that might be smart in certain rule-bound ways when they follow the rules of science and read what the scientists write and act on what the scientists talk about. But they have completely lost the ability to think outside the box and to think critically and to think independently. And part of that is because
for them, thinking outside the box is heresy, outside the scientific box.
Yes, but they don't think science is a limiting factor, so that there would be inside or out. Well, they would say inside or outside probably, but they don't see the box.
I mean, too much of science today is basically assembly line science. Everyone is so specialized in one particular thing, and they're working together as parts of a team, and they don't understand what other people on their own team are doing, and it's all in the service of money. It's corporate, and it sort of lost the spirit of science, something like Tesla was doing. I mean, if we're going to have interesting science, we need people like Tesla.
Right.
Yeah, people that experience the bigness and sense of wonder regarding the universe and what can be known. And once again, it's another case of the difference between people who want to understand and the people who want to have a right answer.
I also think
that again.
For the scientists, science is their religion. So they don't try to look for anything else because they are often satisfied with their scientific experiments and science as being their religion.
Yeah, but depending on their understanding and their attitudes, you can't say that they can't get a spiritual benefit from science, because the face of God is there too.
Oh yeah, definitely. It doesn't prevent them from seeing God, or it shouldn't prevent them from seeing God.
It shouldn't.
Right, it shouldn't, for sure.
But it does. I mean, one interesting statistic is that one of the groups right now, profession-wise, that has the highest rate of suicide are environmental scientists, because they're both trapped within their scientific way of thinking, and they see the data and it looks so bad. And, you know, they can't find a way out of it, so they kill themselves. But there's the other option, like if they knew about the divine realities and maybe had faith that people were more than just a brain and a body, then they might have faith that things could change. But the scientific worldview is depressing, and whether it's the science of the 1840s and Marx or the positivistic scientists of a few decades later or modern science, it's all rather depressing as a worldview. I'm not disparaging science in terms of data and facts, but as a worldview and a philosophy, it leaves a lot to be desired.
It doesn't make a good philosophy.
Well, it doesn't ask the right questions. I mean, science is essentially rationalist, but never asks the question, how does rationalism have its power? Where does that come from?
Yeah, and who is it that's observing these experiments?
Yeah, that too, certainly.
Just the careless and callous disregard of the significance of consciousness is a damning feature of science being a trap. So I think that's why I think if you've got a sense of wonder, you may find something.
Yes, I agree. Sense of wonder, or in, I guess, direct path terms, an intimation of transcendence.
Yeah. Isn't it funny that the history of science has all these scientists finding more and finding more and finding more, but a lot of them don't stop to think that even in what they're looking at right now, there's more. You know, that it isn't just planets that haven't been discovered. It's aspects of experience you're overlooking. What was the story about a master or somebody asking a modern person about something or other and saying, but what's it for? And the person gives a description, you know, and says it's good, and the teacher says, good for what?
Wait a minute, I think I missed some of that.
Well, I may have heard the story from you, and I can't remember the details.
This was Tom Wolfe and the Zen master at an Upper East Side literati party.
All right.
Introducing Zen master to the publisher of the New York Times, I believe.
Oh, I see, yes.
And the question was, you know, why do you do that? And his answer was, well, people think that it's good to be informed about what's happening in the world. And his response is, good for what? And I think that was Tom Wolfe telling that story.
Well, that could be, that works.
All right, good. I'm going to move on to the next question. There's a parable that states that there was a man from Aleppo who one day, while in the market, saw death, who had a strange, surprised look on his face. This man went to see a great wise man to ask what it meant. The wise men said that it meant death would come for him in the next day, so he must escape from Aleppo. The man then traveled quickly to Damascus, but the following day he ran into Death, who had come to claim him. When the man asked how this was possible, Death said that he was due to claim the man on this day in Damascus, and that is why he looked so surprised in Aleppo. Can we change or escape destiny?
Good question. I love that story.
Yes, of course.
It's one of those things that makes you say, huh? Yeah, well, who knows? I mean, if it's destiny, we can't escape it. So is there destiny? How much agency do we have?
Well, to what degree?
Clearly we have some, because it's a divine attribute.
What's the divine attribute here?
Well, what I mean is that on agency, that, God is the prime actor, the doer, and as part of manifestation, a living part of manifestation, there should be a little bit of will in there. I think we inflate its importance, or we inflate our mental processes related to it and are not always correct in identifying what caused it. Did you decide something and then act on it? Well, could you have decided something else? But I like the story.
Yes, what do we like about the story?
Part of it is the sort of the seeming paradox and the resolution of it. And there's a lesson about humility in there, that, there are some things that will happen that you had no agency in. Although this guy thought he had agency, that he was escaping death. Turned out to be part of the plan.
It turned out he had none. Yes.
I also think that, in the example, knowing that he's going to die soon, I mean, there's nothing he can do to change that. So even if we're aware of the destiny, I don't think we have the ability to change it. We probably just have the ability to accept for what it is and act accordingly.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really about how you live with that destiny.
Yeah, and sometimes...
Well, I mean, you can imagine perhaps the same story with a man encountering death in the market in the first city, which was Aleppo, and saying to death, "Oh, is this it?"
Yeah. Well, for some reason he didn't jump to that.
Is that not a more faithful answer?
A more faithful?
Yes. Rather than trying to escape one's destiny or escape something as absolute as death.
No, it's true. I mean, logically, it would make sense to say, "Have you come for me?"
Yes. It makes more sense than saying, "I'm going to get away," because you're, after all, death.
Well, that's because he let somebody else tell him what it meant. There's nothing contradictory about death would come for him the next day. If the next day, he's in Damascus.
Hard to think about that story and death without recalling that story my wife tells that I'm sure I've told you too often about.
I was just thinking about the same. And I was like, maybe by now everybody knows that story, so I didn't mention it. But yeah.
I'm not sure I've heard it.
Well, so Zainab, why don't you tell us?
Lynn's meeting with death. And please fill in, Sheikh Al-Bashir, if I lose track.
I'll let you tell it. There are a few things more annoying than asking someone to tell a story and then interrupting all the time because they didn't get it right. So you tell the story.
Well, Lynn wrote beautifully about her experience when her husband, David, was passing away, and how initially she, knowing how much love they had for each other, she didn't want death to come and take his soul away. So there was a lot of resistance. But when the event occurred, then the way she describes death is, I don't think I can even repeat it for word to word, but she saw it as a beautiful thing, not something to be afraid of.
She said death came and sat with her in the living room.
Yeah.
Until she understood death was not a predator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's just following instructions.
Part of the process.
Right, exactly. He
Part
has a role
of the process. But yes, thank you, Citizen. Glad you remembered it.
And, I always wonder if all of us will have such an experience with death. I guess nobody can know that unless they experience it. But yeah, I always think about that.
It's good to think about death.
Yes.
One of the problems we have in the modern world is that nobody wants to.
Yes, that's right.
And they're in denial about it.
I think much of the psychiatric part of the pharma industry and most of the entertainment industry is basically created for a problem that no one wants to talk about, which is namely people's fear of death.
Yeah.
I think that's accurate.
Well, and there's a reason that some of those things are called diversions.
Yes.
Things you can do that, just involve you and keep you busy or whatever they do. Or maybe thrill you on a roller coaster, which that might be important. But yeah, we are amusing ourselves to death as a people.
Yes.
And some people talk about having fun as if it doesn't have any meaning, and that's what makes it fun. But of course it has meaning.
And we taste death every day when we go to sleep.
Yeah, that is. You could say that's practice for acquiescing to death.
Mm-hmm. The only difference is we sleep with such certainty that we're going to wake up the next day,
Right.
But when we actually encounter the death, that certainty is no longer there because it's right in front of us. So
We've never done it before.
exactly.
Or we don't remember doing it before anyway.
Right.
Right.
It's funny how it's a universal thing, but for every individual, it's a unique experience. It seems to come out of the blue.
So, without necessarily asking another question, I will share just one more of these fun little parables. So, this man and the prophet Isaiah were traveling through the desert on the way to Jerusalem, and they were basically in the middle of nowhere, and they looked tired, and some very, very poor peasant offered them hospitality. He actually gave them his own bed, fed him from the little food he had, and he himself went into the barn and slept with the animals. And in the morning, the poor man's cow died. So then the prophet Isaiah and this other person kept on their journey, and it was getting late. And then they needed to invoke the law of hospitality, and they asked a very rich person to please let them stay. He didn't feed them except some boiled mush and placed them along with the animals. And in the morning, by some miracle, the man's barn, which was in disrepair, was fixed and built stronger than ever. And when they were back on the road, the man asked Isaiah, how is it fair that the man who had the love and fear of God and did the right thing had his cow die, and the man who did the wrong thing had his barn repaired? And Isaiah said, the man who helped us and gave us hospitality was due to be taken away by death in the morning, but because he helped us, instead God took his cow. And the wealthy man who refused to give them decent hospitality, he was due to renovate his barn, and little known to him, there was a chest of gold and gems inside there. And by renovating it through the miracle, God made sure the man didn't become wealthier than he already was. And so you see, even sometimes that when we think there's not divine justice, there really is.
Yeah, there's some story about Al-Hidr that has a similar kind of feel to it. And I don't remember exactly how it goes, but makes the point that there are forces at work that you know nothing of.
So we already heard from Abby in writing her answer to question 5, and I figured that would maybe be the quickest one of all of them. We also heard Saida Zainab's response. What she'd like etched in stone is, I would like to get some food. Right, Saida Zainab?
Yeah, Saida.
Question 5. If you could have a short statement etched in stone, which would be an eternal beacon to humankind, what would your statement be?
I haven't made it yet. It might be the last words I speak.
How many words do we get?
As many as you want.
Well, I'm not sure. I ran into a quotation this week that's a little too long to be my final words, but I liked it so much I will send it to all of you.
All right.
This is something other than the Jack Kerouac?
No, it is Jack Kerouac. Did I share it with you, Saida Zainab?
I don't remember, no.
Well, I'll fix that now, as well as you, Sidi Talha.
All right.
What would my eternal beacon to humankind be? Pay attention.
Yeah.
It's not what you think.
Yeah. Or be aware that you're aware. Everything I can think of is a formula I've heard somewhere else.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know.
Mine would be, the gods are good, the machine will never triumph, and if you prepare for the longest journey, you might just realize it's a joyful one.
I like that last part.
That's
especially.
nice. I like that.
I probably need more time to formulate it better, but what comes to mind right now is just be. This journey
Yeah.
has no end, so just be.
Yeah, that's a good one. I might say, don't worry, be happy.
That's very practical.
I've come around to appreciating that. When I first heard it, I thought it was awful. But
it turns out there's something to it.
Yeah, there sure is. It's similar to just be.
Yeah.
Yes.
Keep calm and carry on. Shit happens.
Be calm and carry on. Yes.
That reminds me, I was listening to, I can't remember his first name right now, Timothy Snyder, talking about, warning about authoritarianism. And one of them is, stay calm when the unexpected happens. And he elaborates on that a little bit, and it's really good advice.
If you ever go to Scotland, I don't know if they still have it, but when I used to work there, I often noticed on the walls they would have, stay calm and drink tea.
Well, maybe there's a little hint of the Zen tea ceremony there.
It's a funny saying because caffeine gives me the jitters. So if I want to keep calm, I can't drink tea.
Well, you could get decaffeinated, but I don't care for tea enough to think about it one way or the other.